Okay, so Assalamu alaikum. Today we'll be talking about utility software and dynamic libraries. So, what exactly is a utility software? So, whenever you install an OS, so a number of utility programs are provided with the operating system itself, right? And you can also install your own utility system, utility software. So, the common ones that are offered by the OS are the hard disk formatter, virus checker, defragmentation software, disk contents analysis or repair software, file compression, and backup software, right? So we'll begin off with hard disk formatter, right? So let's go over what a hard disk formatter is. So first of all, whenever you install a new hard disk into your computer, right? So it needs to be initialized in order for it to store data, right? So a hard disk formatter will organize storage space by assigning it data blocks or partitions. The most common word is partitions, right? So a disk surface may have a number of partitions. A hard drive will have a number of partitions where it can store data, right? So once partitions are created inside of a hard disk, they need to be formatted in order to store data, right? So it is usually done by writing files which will hold directory data and table of contents at the beginning of each partition. And these disk formatters also have checking tools. So these check whether can be there are sectors inside of each of these partitions. So these check which sectors can store data or not. So if a sector is discovered as a bad sector, then the sector will be flagged as bad and the filing will be reorganized and you won't store data over there, right? So now we need to understand what bad sectors are. So there are two categories of bad sectors as well. These are hard bad sectors and soft bad sectors. So the hard bad sectors the hard bad sectors are difficult to repair, right? So these are usually caused due to manufacturing error or damage to the disk surface by the read and write head inside your hard drive, right? Or even a system crash could lead to a damage to a disk surface. Like maybe you were writing some data and your computer crashed due to a power outage. So this can cause a hard bad sector, right? So soft bad sectors. So soft bad sectors are due to sudden loss of power leading to data corruption in some of the sectors or even effect of static electricity leading to a corruption of data in some sectors on the hard disk surfaces, right? Now we move on to virus checkers, right? So we all know any computer can be attacked by a virus, right? And in order to prevent that, you need to have an antivirus software that runs in your background, constantly checks your files, whether a virus is present inside your file or not, right? So basically, it checks software or files before they're run or loaded onto the computer. It also compares them with a database of already known viruses, right? And it also carries out heuristic checking. So this is checking of the software for types of behavior that could indicate a possible virus. So maybe your program keeps crashing. So it may be crashing because of a virus present inside, right? So this is usually useful if software infected by a virus is not yet on the database. So it can find out which new kind of a virus it is and then find out a possible solution and add it to the database if it's a new virus, right? It also puts files or programs which may be infected into quarantine. This automatically deletes the virus or even allows the user to decide whether he wants to delete this file or not, right? So this is what a virus checker does. Okay. So now we move on to defragmentation software, right? So as you use your hard drive over and over again, so you keep writing files, you keep reading them, so the files become scattered all over the disk surface, right? So this happens as files are deleted, partially deleted, extended, and so on, and keep being written to, right? So the consequence of this is slower data access time as they keep scattering, right? So take for example, you have this sector, right? Your hard drive is divided into these sectors, right? And you have this program and one part of it is here, one part of it is here, one part of it is here. To make use of the whole program, you need all three parts of the program. So you'll have to access this serially and you'll have to access it one by one, which leads to a slower access of data, right? So this is what happens, and this is a consequence of fragmentation inside of your hard disk. So it requires several movements just to find and retrieve the data, making up the required file. As I showed, one part can be here, one part can be here, one part can be here. So you need access to all three in order to make up the required file. It also arranges bits of data that makes the file on your computer so they're stored closer and accessed faster. So after running a defragmentation software, right? So this is your same hard drive. So take for example, now are all the file data would be stored next to one another, so it would be easier to access and faster to access. Even one by one it will be faster, since you don't have to rotate around the whole disk, right? Now we move on to disk content analysis and repair software. So analysis software is used to check for disk drives for empty space in disk usage by reviewing files and file folders. So you check through file folders, you find out which spaces are free or which spaces are not. So this also leads to optimal use of disk space by the removal of unwanted files and downloads. So if you won't have any use for a file that you have downloaded years ago, so you may delete it, and then you may have that space useful for another kind of a program that you might be installing or using, right? Now we have disk compression and file compression. So file compression is really essential in order to save storage space and for further transfer of data. So basically, if you have a lot of files that you need to transfer, so you can't emails usually have a limitation, right? So emails have limitation, right? And you have a bunch of pictures, so you're going to compress them. So this is basically your compressed file, and you're going to send over the compressed file which meets the email's limitation. So this is usually done by a file compression software, right? So this utility software compresses data before even writing it to the hard disk. So you can even have it like whenever it's downloading, you can directly compress it and then write it to your hard drive, right? It is also a high priority utility and will essentially override all other operating system routines. So maybe if you're running a file compression software, so your memory will be provided to the file compression software itself, right? You will give more optimized memory, more needed memory to it, since it essentially overrides all operating system routines. It is a high priority routine, high priority utility. So now we move on to backup software. So this utility allows for scheduling backup, right? So if you have a file that is stored on your hard drive, so it's stored on HDD, and you already have a backup for it on another drive, right? So now we'll read the second point. So what does it say? Only carry out a backup procedure when there is a change made to a file. So when you already have the file stored on your hard drive and you already have a backup, so there's no need to create an additional backup for it, right? But when you edit this file, so then only you should back up it again, and this should be overwritten. So this original backup should be overwritten in order to utilize the space to the most effective manner possible, right? And it also gives the ability to restore data, files, or computer from backups. So if you probably deleted a file and you need it really importantly, so you can move back in time and you can restore it from there. This also gives you the ability to create restore points, and then you can move on if you did not like a software update and if you had a backup for it, so you can essentially move back in time and use the older version for it, right? And options of where to save your backup file. So whenever you're creating a backup, so you'll be given an option on where to keep the backup. So you may not want to store it on the original hard drive and you store it on another drive, right? So this is the essential option you get when you're storing the backup files. Now we move on to program libraries, right? So program libraries are used when software is under development and the programmer can utilize pre-written subroutines. So pre-written subroutines can be utilized in the programmer's program that he's writing. So this saves development time, right? So it also helps a developer who wants to use dynamic link library subroutines in their own program. And when software routines are written, they are frequently saved in a program library for future use by a program. So a lot of subroutines may be available to you when you start programming, and you can use them. It saves a lot of time because it's already pre-written, pre-tested, right? So now we think about how now we look at how we should develop, what happens when you develop software this way. So this removes the need to rewrite the many routines every single time. So if you have a subroutine that has been already written and tested, so you can basically just import it into your own program and then use it, right? It also leads to modular programming, which means that several programmers can work on the same piece of software at the same time. So a lot of programmers may be developing their own modules into a one current program, right? So they can work on it at the same time using dynamic link libraries or program libraries. So it also allows continuing with other games that may form a part of the whole range. So a lot of components bring together one component, one program. So that is what happens when you use program libraries. It also saves considerable development time since libraries are fully tested, so you do not have to test them again. So all operating systems have two program libraries. So they are static and dynamic, right? The static libraries are developed and are linked to the executable code in the time of compilation. And so the library routines would be embedded directly into the new program code, right? And dynamic link libraries are only developed and only linked to the original code at launch time. So whenever you're launching, then only your dynamic link library will be linked to the original code that you have written. So, and these are dynamic link libraries are standalone files and they can be accessed as required by the program itself, right? So now we move on to the pros and cons of using DLL files. So DLL files stand for dynamic link library files. So first of all, we'll go over all the pros. So the executable code of the main program is much smaller since you will be importing a dynamic link library. So your own written code will be much smaller in size, and these dynamic link library files are also loaded into the memory at runtime only. And it is also possible to make changes to DLL files independently of the main program. So you don't need to change your own program in order to make a change to the DLL file to make it compatible to your own program. So this only so consequently, if any changes are made to the DLL files, it will not be necessary to recompile the program. So your original program will remain the same. Only the DLL file that has been changed will change and be imported at runtime. So DLL files can also be made available to a number of applications at the same time. So if you have two applications that are running and require DLL, the same DLL file, so it can access the DLL file. So both the applications can access the DLL file at the same time, right? And all these pros mentioned above save memory and execution time, right? Okay, now we move on to cons. So the executable code is not self-contained. So therefore, all DLL files need to be available at runtime. Otherwise, the program will crash. So a program might require two or three dynamic link library files, right? So if you only provide it with one and you do not provide it with two, so the program may not work or just crash itself, right? Any DLL linking software in the main program needs to be available at runtime to allow the links to be made with the DLL file. So basically, when you're running your software, so your main program should have a DLL linking software and it should be available at the time when your main program requires the DLL file. Else, it won't be able to make the link at runtime and the program may not work at all. So if any DLL files are changed, this could lead to the main program giving unexpected results or even crashing. So if you're changing a DLL file and you do not know the compatibility of it with your main program, so when you're running it with your main program and importing it, so your program may crash because they are not compatible with one another, right? And if your DLL file if a malicious code or if a malicious change is happening to your DLL file, right? So when it links to your main program, then it may cause the same effects to your main program. It may have a virus embedded onto itself and the virus may replicate itself on your main program, right?